So we're very lucky to have Intellectual Ventures located in Dublin, and Mary Lou Nolan, who will be embarrassed when I say this, came along and said, we've got exactly the speaker for you. And at great expense, she flew by airline, Kostas Mallios all the way from Seattle in the United States. And I want to introduce Kostas, who's the Vice President of Intellectual Ventures. He believes in the power of ideas and individuals to make a difference. And through invention and strategic partnerships across industries and governments, his organization is currently creating new business opportunities to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And in particular, they're engaging with cities. So without further ado, because Kostas will have to leave at 4:30 for a meeting with our Minister for Enterprise, Innovation and Employment, Richard Bruton, I will give the stage to Kostas. Kostas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope everyone's having a great day. This is my second day in Ireland, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm impressed by the place, I'm impressed by the people, and I hope to come back soon. Innovation is really an endeavor about ideas. It's about solving problems. And frankly, if you don't have a big enough problem, you can't really generate big enough ideas. At Intellectual Ventures, we're all about big ideas. And this is really a good thing. If we look around today in our cities across the world, if we look across our continents, we see problems everywhere. You have challenges around poverty, as you all are aware. You have challenges around environmental degradation. We have challenges of energy production and efficiency. We have challenges around bio and bio threats. It seems like everywhere you look, there is something to be solved. There is a challenge. For our business, this is a good thing. We wish maybe there weren't that many challenges, but for our business, this is great because we thrive on this kind of challenge. So we call ourselves an invention company, and we work with inventors. And what we've done over the last 10 years of our existence is build what we consider an innovation watering hole, an invention ecosystem. So let's look at Intellectual Ventures by the numbers. We're about a $5.8 billion fund. We have about 800 employees. We're in 13 countries. We're the largest non-practicing patent holder in the world. We file literally thousands of patents per year, and we buy equally as many from the market. Our primary goal is to figure out how ideas and how inventors with those ideas can change the world we live in today, and how those people can actually work to address some of our biggest challenges. At the core, as I mentioned, is inventors. Inventors are at the core of the problem-solving puzzle, if you will. And we work with inventors in universities. We work with them in their pajamas, in their homes. We work with them in large corporate R&D labs. And we have a huge partnership ecosystem and model to really do that. So you might say, so what? What does that mean for cities? What does that mean for people? What does that mean for our society today and the one we aspire to have? And we think it's actually very germane, because if we can turn on this machinery, if we can focus this ecosystem, all this ingenuity, all this energy toward a particular problem, we believe we can have some great results. So we actually have a lab. This is some pictures of our lab. We have PhDs, dozens and dozens of PhDs that work in it. We work on a variety of things. I'm going to share with you some of those things, because we like to say we work on anything but pharmaceuticals. But everything else is pretty much fair game for us, from computers and software to chips to energy, you name it, we dabble in it. And many, many times we actually come up with some great stuff. As I mentioned earlier, ideas are basically about creating options. Solutions are hard to come by. So we think a great strategy towards solving problems is actually creating a series of options that you can pursue individually or collectively and try to solve the problem. We're even tackling some of the biggest ones, like energy. And I'm proud to say, although I'm actually an environmentalist at heart, that we've actually created a nuclear reactor that uses spent nuclear fuel that provides much, much safer, much, much cheaper energy for the world. We're not quite sure how this will play out, but we have actually raised over $100 million in this business from the market, so the market believes it's an alternative. We think about malaria a lot, and I'll explain a little bit further why, but we've come up with what we call a photonic fence. And a photonic fence is one way of actually going after malaria-carrying mosquitoes in the developing world. It's not the kind of a blanket thing you want to just deploy across the continent, for example, but in specific places like clinics, where it's very important to keep away malaria-carrying mosquitoes, the photonic fence could be one solution. I particularly like this, so I'm going to show you a quick video of a malaria-carrying mosquito. It is targeted by a laser, and it is actually zapped out of the sky. It knows that it's female because of the frequency the wings make, and it's able to target them in a very, very accurate way. We actually have this functioning in our lab today. If any of you are in Seattle and you'd like a tour, please call me. And we have a mosquito incubator as well, but that's a different story. But again, what's great about this is these are solutions you don't necessarily expect, for problems that are common. And this is what I think Ingenuity is about. This is what IV is about. Okay, another one is cold chain. Let me give you some context. A lot of people know about intellectual ventures. They understand that we buy, we partner, we build a lot of innovation, we file a lot of patents. But some of the things they don't know really about the companies, some of the other parts of our business or the other parts of our organization. One of them is a fund that's actually called Global Good. I call it the Do Good Fund. And it's actually in support of the Gates Foundation. We exclusively do research for malaria, for polio, and for other things for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I spent 15 years at Microsoft. It's kind of funny in life how you don't go very far, in your adjacent steps in your career. And it's actually quite interesting. But one of the problems with vaccines in the third world is getting the vaccine to where you need it. Vaccines require a stable environment. They require refrigeration. And as you know, electricity is at a premium. Refrigeration in the developing world is at a premium. So we've actually built canisters, these containers, these cold chain transport mechanisms that basically transport vaccines and keep them stable for up to 6 months without refrigeration, electricity, or any other kind of power. Think of it as an amazing thermos. So we believe in inventors. We believe that they are the core of what we do. We believe that it is the essence of really problem solving in today's in facing up to today's challenges. And we believe that inventors and some of the things we talked to you about earlier about our ecosystem actually are part of also a vibrant city. We believe that as you put together inventors and companies and academia and corporate R&D labs, wherever they might be, and you bring them together as an ecosystem, they thrive off each other. So the ecosystem that we've created for our business to be able to invent and to be able to share those inventions with the world in an open way is something that we also believe can be deployed to solve some of the city's biggest problems. So when I look at the world, I think about the places that we know and love, like my hometown of Seattle, and it's known for airplanes and Microsoft and Starbucks. And then I think about the Pearl River Delta, which is known for its huge electronics supply chains. And then I think about Bangalore and India in general, what it's done around outsourced IT, which is now building its own software businesses from that endeavor. I think of Copenhagen, one of my favorite cities, which has done a great job around clean tech. It's leading the world in that way. And this list goes on. And of course, the venerable Silicon Valley, which everyone is trying to emulate. Now, why is this important? It's important from my perspective because I think cities need a brand. I think cities need to be more than just a company town. Cities need an ecosystem of companies supporting each other, very much like the electronic supply chain, which has now been built in China, which is very, very difficult to replicate and to duplicate in other places. And when I think about all those things that make up these vibrant cities and their brand and what they stand for and what they've purposefully or somehow accidentally have developed into, I think about your cities, and I think about where you fall on the map. And I think it's important to think about it this way, because a brand around your city, a conscientious effort to build a brand about how and what you do, and bringing together all those players, the inventors, the companies, the academics, the labs, bringing it together as a center of excellence is at the core of an idea that I want to introduce to you called innovation megaprojects. Innovation megaprojects require government to think just a little bit differently. Traditionally, government has actually held on and maintained a lot of power in society. When you think back centuries, I think we can argue that this is very true. What has happened over time, particularly post the industrialized era, is industry has taken on a much bigger importance than it ever had in the past. The amount of economic activity that industry actually created, I think basically maybe threw off the balance of power a little bit. I think we would argue the past 5 years we've been living globally a little bit of that. I think we're now at a new era. I think now is a great time for government and for industry to partner in a new way, to partner in a real balanced way, to take advantage of each other's strengths, and to focus on what industry does best, and allow the cities and government and regions and countries to focus on what they do best. And they are different, but they sure are complementary. I think the combination of those can build great cities, regions, and countries for our citizens to live in. Let me give you a great example. So you look at this building. How many of you have been to Singapore? Great. This is the Marina Bay Sands, and I'm sure you recognize it. It's really a marvelous piece of architecture, piece of infrastructure. It is something that the government of Singapore catalyzed, really nurtured, I think had a huge vision around. And today you can marvel at both the magnificent pool at the hotel at the top deck, the overall observation deck, the amazing retail shopping, the casino that is there, the hotel, and just its stature around the bay. And I think frankly, it's a jewel of Singapore. And it's fantastic. If you haven't been there, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do so. It gives you a perspective that is unlike anything I've ever seen around the world. And it started with a government-validated plan. The government had this vision for this huge infrastructure project. And why? Because this is what government does. Physical infrastructure has always been an asset that government has had. Governments build great roads, they build great parts of cities, they build great shopping areas, they catalyze developers to come in. They catalyze subcontractors to go in and work there. I think there were 10,000 subcontractors alone in this particular project. And this project, I think, cost about $6 billion, with the government of Singapore subsidizing a good part of that. The only problem with this project, as beautiful and as wonderful it is to look at and to experience as a citizen of Singapore or as a tourist to that city, is that the day it was delivered, it was actually obsolete. Think about it. This project was an amazing economic development exercise at full bore, if you will, while it was being built in terms of construction and innovation. People had to think about what are they going to put into this building, how is it going to be different, how is it going to look unique, how will the experience be something that's new and exciting. But they're missing a critical element of it, which is post-delivery. You know, what does this really do? Well, it creates some service jobs for the hotels and for the retail. It creates a great place for people and tourists to go and experience the casinos and so forth. But all the innovation that went into this huge project, all that money, all that energy stopped the day it was delivered. So the challenge, as we thought about it, is how do we take a project like this, and is it possible to turn it not just into this great delivered, on-time, on-budget experience for the government, and also a great quality of life, I think, catalyst for the citizens, but can you do what you normally do as a government and have economic spillover that is beyond what is expected? So we think you can, and I'll explain a little bit how. So this building started off with a traditional approach, and we can do that, but our process is a little bit different. What we do is we actually start off with a basic vision, what government already does well and what it enjoys doing and what it has a lot of experience in. And then we add a couple of key ingredients that I think radically change the outcome. Those two ingredients is what we call an innovation architect and platform sockets, innovation sockets. Those two key ingredients allow a piece of infrastructure, a large social program, something that a government wants to do for its citizens, to actually become a sustainable, virtuous ecosystem of continuous innovation and updating of the project itself over time. In other words, you don't get obsolescence on delivery, and you actually get economic spillover effects of that project way after it is being delivered. The last, which is actually really interesting, is you actually get an export economy, and I'll explain what that is. Let's talk a little bit about these sockets. We all know what standards are. We use them all the time. an example of a great standard is USB. That little USB plug on the side of your computer that started off as a way for you to synchronize data with a hard drive in your computer is actually now much more than that. I don't know about you, but I use my USB socket, if you will, as a place to charge my Bluetooth earpiece. I charge my phone. I can use it as a lamp. I can do all kinds of things. So when you think about something that is just there initially to actually transfer data and be a conduit of data back and forth, well, a variety of devices can plug into it. You can actually turn that in the future into not just a variety of devices, but completely different devices than ever envisioned. In other words, if you build in for ongoing innovation, you can actually achieve it through standards. Standards don't have to be single purpose. Another good example is iOS, the Apple operating system that it uses on iPhones and iPads. Windows is another one. You could have built all these systems with built-in applications that would basically be delivered at the first version, and then you could sort of keep versioning them. Or you could do what Apple, for example, has done very recently and very well, which is you can build it as a platform that companies come to deliver their first product, their second product, the third product. The platform itself doesn't change that often. But as you think about what's happening to technology, it actually makes a lot of sense. Technology is increasing at a huge rate. The cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Let me give you an example. I've recently purchased an HVAC system for my house. This is a true story. And recently, meaning 2002. And I paid tens of thousands of dollars for this HVAC system. And it's built into my walls of my house, and I can basically turn it on and I get a great experience. 5 or 6 years later, that same HVAC system cost half as much and consumed more than half as much, more than 50% of the energy of the initial system. In other words, technology had caught up to this system that was built for 20 years in about 3 or 4 or 5 years. But I'm stuck. I'm held hostage by my HVAC system in my house because in order for me to rip and replace this system, it's very, very costly and very disruptive. So the concept of innovation sockets, the same way you plug in one device into your USB connection today, and then in the future you can plug in a different device, actually makes a lot of sense, both in the concepts of infrastructure and the concept of cities. In the concept of infrastructure, again, it doesn't render your infrastructure obsolete. Further, it allows you to target that same socket over and over again by different companies. So what you end up with, essentially, is you end up attracting companies at the first time, and then companies keep coming back to target that as a deployment opportunity. One of the critical things about government, I think, in the building of infrastructure, is that people trust in government much more so than in any individual company. They know eventually they're going to get paid. They know most governments don't go bankrupt. And so people show up. The role of government is a great catalyst for companies, individuals in an ecosystem to rally, show up, and deliver great innovation. That recycling of innovation on top of these sockets is what's the most important piece, because once they deliver, then there is a natural economic incentive for companies to keep coming back and innovating without the government's further involvement. And that's key, because governments are used to subsidizing over and over and over again. And what we're saying is that's one model, but another model is to subsidize once and let a natural market-driven system continue to spin around the project in the future. So what's important to know is that sockets actually give you relief from obsolescence, and that sockets can actually help you create an innovation ecosystem that is sustainable over time. There's another large distinction about IMP, which is interesting. When a government actually does an infrastructure project, salespeople show up because they want to sell you things for that project. They want to sell you asphalt for your roads. They want to sell you steel for your bridges. They want to sell you electronics for your buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all well and good. But when the sale ends, those companies are gone. And those companies quite often are not from your hometown. They're not from your region. They may not even be from your country. What we're talking about is to turn a normal mega project infrastructure endeavor into a sustaining ecosystem by requiring that companies that bid on that project actually do R&D for that project in that town, city, region, or country. What's important about that is, as everyone knows, tech transfer is an important opportunity that shouldn't be missed. More importantly, not just tech transfer, but bringing others into a particular area to do their work creates a little bit of stickiness. People don't like to move. Ireland is a great example of this, where companies were enticed to come here in a variety of ways, regional, policy, and so forth, and companies are now staying, they're growing. So even if some of those incentives actually dissipate, it's going to be really hard for some of these companies to pick up either thousands of employee workforce and actually move them to another location. It just doesn't happen as easily and as readable as you might think. So in recap, we believe that you can turn a mega project that governments do so well into an innovation ecosystem that gives you both the project plus economic benefits for the long term. It creates a sustainable, open innovation ecosystem for companies, for individuals, for academics to play and to use as a watering hole for them to gather around. It also produces other interesting side effects. Investors that invest in startups actually are interested in those startups having customers. These mega projects, these innovation mega projects, can actually help bolster your startup base and your startup activity in your city or country. Investors also like to invest in those companies, and what ends up happening is the risk is actually reduced because they're targeting a very specific project. When that happens, the valuation of companies actually goes up. And again, all these little things, all these conditions are what is required for a system to come together initially and then to spin up. And the last piece, I think, which is critical is, once you do it in one place, once you build a great piece of infrastructure or a great project in one place for that particular first customer, those conditions are still existing after it's delivered. So those companies have worked together. They've already hired the employees. They've built the expertise. They are incentivized to go do it again. So one of the results is an export economy, which is actually quite interesting. So what you do is you take your city, you do what you've already done forever. You bring in the different players. You bring in multinationals. You bring in domestic companies, domestic startups and multinationals. And then you get your project, but then you also get a center of excellence around that particular area. You use your existing spend to catalyze a new industry. Let me talk to you about some of the real projects. I mean, these are great concepts, but we actually have real projects that we're working on with governments. Food safety. Food safety is becoming a real issue, and I'm sure you're wondering when you're eating your hamburger, what it has in it, and whether it, it actually goes moo or it goes and it's kind of fun. But food safety is actually more serious than that. And when you're paying for organic, are you getting organic? When you're drinking your water, has it really been tested and is it safe? In cases of some Asian countries, when you're buying eggs, are they real eggs or do they have paint inside of them? So food safety is an issue and a megatrend that we're working on with an Asian government today. Another great example is what we call plug-and-play construction. For obvious reasons, we believe in plug-and-play rather than rip and replace. We believe in the longevity of construction projects and the economic offshoots that they create. So we're working today with another Asian government to basically build hundreds of thousands of apartments, and we will take on the role as innovation architect to actually build out the technology for HVAC systems, for control systems, for new materials for insulation, and for energy efficiency. Last, but this is actually my favorite project, is aging. I have a 100-year-old grandmother who I love, and we all have parents that are aging. And I hate to tell you this, but we're all going in the same direction. So we have all a personal vested interest to actually take care of the aging opportunity or problem, depending on how you see it. So today we're working with the European government to actually design new technologies that will help alleviate some of the pressures and challenges around aging populations. If you look at the developing world today, and what the Asians call a silver tsunami, most developing populations have really a bankrupt threat a decade or two down the road. If you look at the amount of consumption the system needs to take care of its elderly, it's actually staggering. So one of the challenges that we're trying to figure out is, how do you keep elderly happy? How do you keep them in their home? How do you keep them away from acute care when they don't need it? How do you keep them connected to their family? How do you use remote diagnosis devices to get to them quicker and to actually help prevent issues like a fall, which once you fall, it's interesting, but the ramifications of a fall are felt for years, and the cost to the system, but more importantly, the quality of life to the elder person is actually significant. Those are real implications of what we can actually help address. I mean, if we can help figure out a way to lower the cost through technology in the elderly healthcare system while maintaining or increasing the quality of life, I think that's a great way to address the social trend, which is very concerning to a lot of countries. So again, to recap, we believe that you can have your traditional project, and they're great projects. Governments do really, really great at this. But we believe by adding an innovation architect that helps by building innovation sockets, that helps manage this innovation ecosystem, and actually delivers that first project, you actually get a whole different city as a result. You don't get a project, you get an industry. You get a center of excellence that the world would look to and want to emulate. You get companies that have been created or have altered their current course of business around this opportunity that now have an incentive to actually go do it again in other parts of the world. And you get all those benefits for your city, your region, or for your country. So the question I want to ask you is, as you think about your place in the world, and you think about what are your competitive advantages, how do you make a brand for your city? How do you bring together an invention ecosystem that I think is part of a vibrant city? As you think about all those, where do you fall on the map? Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas.